Hey guys, what's up? We're back doing predictions for UFC 219, Cyborg versus Holm. Follow me on Twitter, my link is in the description, at MMA Breakdown 0. Last event, fight night, Ortega versus Swanson. I went 7 for 13 on fantasy, moved within the top 400. I'm in the 390s currently, heading into UFC on Fox 26. And I made a grand total of $8 and change on the night. What happened was I had my main bet, a parlay of Alex Perez and Trevin Giles, won that, and then foolishly I bet on another parlay of Jason Knight and Luke Sanders, both of whom lost, and that obviously slashed my winnings from my most confident bet, and ended up with only about $9 on the night. But I still made money, and that's a positive for me. You know, if I would have made $9 on every event since I started betting, I would be in a much better position right now. So, you know, better than making $0 and certainly better than losing money. But there is a lesson there. I hedged my less confident bet with my most confident one. So I made sure to bet less than my winnings, what my winnings would be from my most confident bet if that paid out. So I won like $38 from the Giles Perez parlay, and I made sure to only bet 30 on the Knight Sanders parlay. Obviously not something you can guarantee every time, but that is a strategy that's worked for me before, not just on this last event. So I think there's something to take away from that. Just my advice, but yeah, made a little bit of money. But there are some bets I'm interested in making on this card, so let's do it. At welterweight, Abdulrazak Alhassan versus Sabah Homasi, the rematch. And I'm going to take Razak Alhassan. I think he was pretty clearly the more athletic, more dangerous fighter in that fight. Homasi was offering some resistance and didn't go away that easily, and you know, I guess it was a bad stoppage, but I think Alhassan proved that he can put hands on him. He had the forward pressure, could drive him back into the fence, and had the bigger power. So I'll go with Alhassan by finish again in this rematch. All right, at light heavyweight, Khalil Roundtree versus Michael Oleksiejczuk. I'm going with Khalil Roundtree. Oleksiejczuk, when I researched him for what was supposed to be his debut against Jan Kutalaba several events ago, what I saw from him was that he's a guy who goes out and early in fights lets his opponents pour on the offense, nearly gets stopped, and finds a way to survive, and slowly fights his way back into the fight and ends up knocking out his opponent. So definitely a slow starter, and even in coming back and knocking out his opponents didn't really strike me as that gifted or technical of a striker, but just a guy who can really withstand a big early storm, take a lot of punishment, and be there to capitalize as his opponents start to fade. And I think Roundtree is enough of that fast starter. He's enough of a fast starter, enough of an early blitzer here to finish off Oleksiejczuk before he gets a chance to get back in the fight. His last performance against Paul Craig I thought was really impressive. Just his fluidity, his comfort on the feet, seemed really confident, you know, really loose, had his hands down, and just walked him down and landed big bombs. And Oleksiejczuk being a slow starter, I think that's just going to give Roundtree, you know, the opportunity to overwhelm him early. So I'm going with Roundtree, but Roundtree is breakable. We saw that, you know, ever since his tough days, losing pretty badly to Corey Hendricks. I believe it was in the first round, you know, got taken down and choked out, and Hendricks, you know, went on to lose his UFC fight, and, you know, not a guy who went on to have success. And also Tyson Pedro, after Roundtree dropped him in their fight, ended up getting taken down and choked out. So he is a guy who has let his opponents get back into the fight after he started strong, but I think he's got enough power and enough confidence to put away Oleksiejczuk in the first storm. So I'm going to take Roundtree by TKO. Not a highly confident pick, not one I'd bet on, but I am going with him. All right, middleweight, Marvin Vettori versus Omari Akhmedov. This is a competitive matchup. Vettori, I've been impressed with. Can push a really high pace, throw a lot of volume, but he's still green. And I think the wrestling here is really going to make the difference, just as it did in Akhmedov's last fight against, was it Abdul Razak Alhassan? Let me verify. Yeah, against Abdul Razak Alhassan, who I think is more athletic, more of a knockout threat than Marvin Vettori. So yeah, this to me really comes down to whether Vettori can stop the shot of Akhmedov. I think there is a chance. I see this as a pick-em. I think Vettori can push enough of a pace on the feet, keep coming after Akhmedov, and just chip away at him with all the volume, like he did to Vitor Miranda in his last fight. But, you know, Akhmedov, we've seen him put away down the stretch against the Brazilian Elizu Zaleski dos Santos. He gave the fight away against Sergio Moraes in the third round, so he's definitely a guy, even if he's up 2 rounds, he can just totally fall apart in that third. And Vettori, being a tough guy, being a tank who's always coming forward, always putting forth offense, I think he could either steal a decision here late if he loses the first couple rounds, or get that finish late. But I just think that I think Akhmedov is going to be too good a wrestler for Vettori here. I think he can also strike with him enough on the feet. I think he's got enough power in his hands to not just shell up like Vettori's previous opponents, you know, like Vitor Miranda and Alberto Uda. So yeah, I'm going to go with Akhmedov to get it done with the wrestling. But that, you know, that's a close fight. I see that as a kind of a pick-em, but I'm going to go with Akhmedov by decision. All right, lightweight, Miles Jury versus Rick Glenn. This could be a really tough fight for Jury, coming back after the long layoff, fighting a guy like Rick Glenn, who's, you know, just a hound with his wrestling and always on guys, always looking for the tie-up and looking to drag his opponents to the ground, just like he did to Gavin Tucker in his last fight. If Jury's a step slow or, you know, mentally not completely there, you know, Rick Glenn is just an absolute workhorse, and I think you know, that kind of fight could you know, just be too much for Jury coming back from a long layoff. So taking that into consideration, I do think that Glenn has a chance here, but I can't ignore that Jury is the more skilled, more dynamic fighter. Has a lot more tools, I think, especially on the feet. He's just a more intelligent striker. More, he's patient. He can set up his strikes. We've seen power from him. In the Takanori Gomi fight, can really wait for an opening and capitalize on it. And he's not a bad grappler himself, not as much of a straightforward meat and potatoes wrestler like Glenn, but he's got his own kind of funky style of grappling. He can hit trips and odd takedowns from the clinch. So I think Jury's still skilled enough that he can get this win. I think he can give Glenn enough of a tough time on the feet. I don't think he's just going to get walked down and just battered like Gavin Tucker. But Jury is a guy who's had some pretty disappointing performances, like the Charles Oliveira fight where he gets put away early, doesn't put up much of a fight. The Donald Cerrone fight didn't really offer much as a rising prospect at the time. So yeah, this one I could see going Glenn's way, but I think Jury's still the more skilled fighter overall and has more tools than Glenn, so I'm going to take him, but that's really a tough one considering Jury's layoff. All right, a flyweight, Luis Smolka versus Matheus Nicolau. I'm going with Nicolau here. Smolka's just been on a slide, still a very dangerous grappler, a very aggressive fighter, strong scrambler and really committed to scrambling and hunting for submissions and going for ground and pound on the ground. But Matheus Nicolau, I think, has shown a lot of development, had a really nice win over John Moraga, where he showed to be the much craftier, more skilled striker than Moraga. And the guy himself has submission ability. Hit a bulldog choke on his tough Brazilian castmate Bruno Correa in his UFC debut. Yeah, and he's a solid prospect. Smolka's been struggling with the weight cut in his last several fights. Just hasn't really looked the same, losing to Tim Elliott, and before that getting dominated by Ray Borg. If Smolka can really get this to the ground, really press his wrestling and grappling game, I could see him giving Nicolau trouble, but I think Nicolau is going to be prepared for that. I think he's a strong enough scrambler to avoid just being put on his back and put in bad positions on the ground by Smolka all fight. And I really think the difference is going to come on the feet, where Smolka's striking is, I'd say, still pretty basic and pretty rudimentary compared to what Nicolau can do. I think he's going to be the much more technical and skilled striker and kickboxer here. I think he's going to give Smolka enough trouble on the feet where he can't just turn this into a scramble fest like he did against Elliott and Ben Wynn. So going with Nicolau by decision. Yeah. All right, at welterweight, Kamaru Usman versus Emil Weber Meek. I'm going all in on Usman here. I think this is an easier fight than his last fight against Sergio Moraes. Probably even I just don't see I don't see Meek as being on the same level as Sergio Moraes or even Sean Strickland or even Leon Edwards. He's a more aggressive fighter than those guys. Really goes after his opponents on the feet and will really hunt for takedowns, but he's not a pure wrestler. certainly won't be on the same level as Usman as far as wrestling goes. And on the feet, I think Usman has much better timing. I think he can match Meek's power on the feet. And yeah, you know, Meek, he had some trouble early against Jordan Meehan. Meehan was connecting on him, you know, giving him trouble, being the rangier, craftier striker. And Usman's got really good sense and control of distance. I just see this as kind of I see Meek being overmatched here, honestly, in every area. The only real asset I see Meek having is his pace. If he could, you know, somehow tire out Usman, but Usman has, you know, shown great cardio and you know, the ability to maintain a high pace throughout his fight. So yeah, I have to go with Usman. And it's a confident pick. I'm going to be betting big on this one. All right, at lightweight, Dan Hooker versus Mark Diakiese. Going with Diakiese here. After his loss to Drakkar Klose, it's hard to be really confident in his style anymore. But I think he's dynamic enough, you know, puts out enough volume on the feet and is unorthodox enough to at least just style on Hooker and outpoint him for 3 rounds. The last time, you know, Hooker fought a really relentless, high-volume striker was Maximo Blanco, and he just dominated Hooker, really put it on him, was able to just pot shot him all fight long. And I see Diakiese pretty much being able to do the same, but with the advantage of being unorthodox, being rangy. The only thing about Diakiese is, you know, the clinch exchanges where, you know, he likes to go for these big takedowns, these big slams, and if he gets in the clinch with Hooker, you know, that's where Hooker's dangerous. He has a really good guillotine that he can find from the clinch. He'll jump guard for the guillotine and finished several guys with it. Mark Edeva, and well, maybe that was the only guy if I'm remembering correctly. But you know, he has that guillotine. He has knockout power that he showed against Ross Pearson. And yeah, Diakiese just being exposed as, you know, a guy who only has dynamism and not much fundamentals to his game. That worries me a little bit with Hooker. But yeah, you know, also Yair Rodriguez, a guy with a fairly similar style to Diakiese, you know, a dynamic, unpredictable striker, was just able to tee off on Hooker, and I think that's what Diakiese is going to do here. So going with Diakiese, I think by decision maybe. Hooker's a tough guy. It's one I'd like to bet on, but I just can't after the Drakkar Klose loss, but Diakiese is my pick. All right, at welterweight, Carlos Condit versus Neil Magny. I feel like Condit really should have a big advantage on the feet here, and I want to take him very confidently, but he's a guy who pretty much retired and looked pretty awful in his last fight before retiring, and you know, just looked fragile, getting rocked by a ground and pound shot from Damian Maia, and then admitting after that you know, he couldn't take shots anymore. You know, pretty concerning, pretty telling of the guy's physical condition at this point, and that's what really worries me here, because Condit, you know, way more functional striking game than Neil Magny. You know, just a lot more dynamic, a lot more creative, really accurate from range. Can put really, one of the best combination strikers, maybe at least in welterweight history. And Magny, doesn't throw combinations. He can pump a jab, but it's not a jab that really leads to him hurting his opponents on the feet. It doesn't really lead to much else other than just scoring points. And he's not really a power striker, Magny. He's never really put anyone down with his striking. What he is a cardio machine that is able to get in these really chaotic exchanges, and when his opponents start to get too wild, leave themselves open, and start to peter out, that's when he can really capitalize on them, like he did against Hector Lombard and Hyun-Gyu Lim, and especially on the ground, if he can find an advantageous position, he's super dangerous from there, especially with his back mount and ground and pound. So that's really the only avenue here I see for Magny, is if Condit is just so shop-worn and fragile at this point that he can't stop the takedown, even against a guy who hasn't really been an overpowering wrestler at all. But if it ends up on the ground, Condit has always struggled against strong grapplers and wrestlers. I feel like Magny might be strong enough, might have just the size and strength to hold him down or take his back on the mat. But, other than that, if Condit is in, good enough shape to at least keep this fight on the feet and throw like he did in the Lawler fight and in the, what was the other fight he had before Lawler? I can't remember now, but yeah, if we get that Condit that can really mix up his combinations and his striking, I just see him being able to control distance and outpoint Magny. So I'm going to go with Condit, but that's an interesting one, and there's a real chance, I think, that Magny upsets and is just the more physically dominant fighter and kind of roughs up Condit on the ground. But yeah, I'll go with Condit by decision. All right, a women's strawweight, Cynthia Calvillo versus Carla Esparza. This is another fight on the card that I'm going to be betting on. I'm just going Calvillo all the way. I think it's a horrible matchup for Esparza. I think she plays right into Calvillo's hands here. I mean, what can you really say? Carla Esparza, I thought she deserved to get the decision against Randa Marcos, but, made that such a tough fight on herself, just getting caught up in these scrambles and these exchanges on the ground where they were trading submission attempts and getting in all these weird tie-ups on the ground, not being able to really utilize her positional grappling, her what should have been a wrestling advantage for her in that fight. And against a real speed chess ground player in Calvillo, I think she's just going to tie her up and find the back quick and choke her out. She's got all the momentum and the confidence. Esparza, even in the Juliana Lima fight, didn't fully look like herself. Was able to get the takedowns she needed to seal the decision and work her ground and pound a little bit, but certainly, didn't seem to be the same fighter that took out Rose Namajunas. Her takedowns didn't come as easily. Her ground and pound wasn't as convincing. And, yeah, really that Marcos fight is the one that is really, really convincing me here that Calvillo is just going to be able to submit her on the ground. And on the feet, Esparza is an okay boxer, but I think Calvillo's speed, her jab, is really going to let her beat Esparza to the punch here. probably tag her up on the feet a little bit, maybe force Esparza to shoot, and from there I think Calvillo just can be all over her, the much quicker, more fluid grappler, and a very dangerous submission artist. So I'm betting on this one. I think Calvillo is going to win by submission. I don't know if I would, I might place a bet on that, but certainly just a straight bet on Calvillo I think is worth it here. All right, at bantamweight, Jimmie Rivera versus John Lineker. I'm really liking Rivera. He's just a guy who keeps picking up wins against guys that, going into the matchup, you feel that he shouldn't beat. Maybe like the Thomas Almeida fight. He just keeps knocking off these prospects, and he very well may be able to do it all the way to a title shot and maybe a title win. He's just a very controlled, measured boxer, but can also really turn up the heat when he has to. Has a lot of pop in his hands. He's durable. And, Lineker probably has the power advantage still. I think maybe hits harder than Rivera, maybe not. It's just kind of the more natural brawler, but Lineker, I think, has really showed, at least in the in his last fight against Marlon Vera, his game is getting figured out. Vera, a guy with no hands, really, but kind of a more new breed understanding of range striking and dynamic striking with kicks and spinning attacks, was kind of starting to put the scare in Lineker a little bit by the third round of that fight. He was connecting on some decent shots from range, making it tough for Lineker to just completely brawl with him. Lineker still, landed the big power shots enough to win that fight, but you go from a guy like that to a guy like Rivera, who's a very schooled, very skilled fundamental boxer. And I think he's just going to have, the more intelligent game here to kind of outclass Lineker on the feet a little bit. So I'm going to go with Rivera by decision. It's not a lock, and even in that Thomas Almeida fight, Almeida started to come back in that third round, and we know Lineker, he's there till the last round and always throwing, always hunting for the knockout. And if he could, keep pace with a guy like Dodson, I think he can certainly be there by the third round. Still going after Rivera, but yeah, I think Rivera's fundamental boxing is just going to be too much here, at least for the early rounds. I think Rivera can win those first and second rounds, outpoint Lineker, and I don't expect him to get finished if Lineker does come on strong in that third round. So I'm going with Rivera by decision. I think this is one I'm going to be placing a bet on. Not as big, certainly, as Calvillo or Usman, but yeah, I just have a feeling that Rivera, kind of an unassuming guy, never really gets that super impressive breakout win, but just silently, humbly keeps knocking off these contenders and is just proving to be a really skilled fighter, skilled boxer who is winning all these matchups. I think he's going to do it here against Lineker. All right, at lightweight, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Edson Barboza. This is, I think, the trickiest fight on the card to call. And again, like we've mentioned, seems to be the theme on this card. These guys returning from layoffs. like Condit and Miles Jury, but, you know, Nurmagomedov, clearly, you know, the better fighter. If this, you know, if there was no layoff issue here, I would very easily, very comfortably take Nurmagomedov. And Barboza has been a guy who's struggled with wrestlers in the past. The Danny Castillo fight, or guys who are just willing to throw hands to close the distance. If you think of the Jamie Varner finish, or even Tony Ferguson, who was losing that fight, but just with pace and determination and continuous forward pressure was able to eventually break him. A guy like Nurmagomedov, who's maybe the best wrestler we've ever seen in the UFC, and a guy who is so competent at closing the distance to get in on the takedown and completing it, and then on the ground, just again, one of the best control guys, one of the best guys at mounting people and finishing them from top position with devastating ground and pound. That skill set should absolutely be the one to destroy Barboza. But, with the layoff, and, Nurmagomedov was out for a year or 2 years, whatever it was, before he came back to fight Johnson. And now it's another year since that fight. It's just kind of, getting to a point where, when is enough? All of this time out and whatever injuries he's been dealing with in the interim. When is this really all going to catch up to him? Because people criticized him in the Horcher fight. They said he looked rusty, looked slow. And, again, once he was able to get the fight to the ground, I thought looked stellar, looked amazing. And then the Michael Johnson fight almost got knocked out. Came back, and again, once he got it on the ground, you just see how dominant and brilliant he is. But this fight against Barboza, I feel like Barboza, being maybe just as technical a striker as Johnson, but a more composed, measured striker, and a guy who can really strike going backwards. He showed that in his last fight against Beneil Dariush, and landed that, I believe it was a knee, as Dariush was dipping down for a takedown and caught him flush, put him out. I have a feeling that he's going to pull something like that off here against Nurmagomedov. If Nurmagomedov is at all, physically diminished, even just infinitesimally, just a fraction slower, I could see Barboza really capitalizing on that. Even if Nurmagomedov is able to drive him back, pursue the takedown, even get in on his legs, I think that Barboza is a skilled enough striker, off of the back foot to still maintain enough separation to thwart some of the takedown attempts early of Nurmagomedov. I think he's got more confidence from the win streak he's been on, the wins over Pettis, the knockout win over Beneil Dariush. And the biggest thing is that Nurmagomedov just still hasn't proven that he has hands at all. Barely survived against Michael Johnson, was getting lit up. And, people say it didn't look great against Horcher early. Going against one of the most technical strikers in Barboza. If Barboza is at all able to thwart those initial takedown attempts, draw this thing out, get his time to read Nurmagomedov, find his openings, I don't know. I just feel like with all the layoffs now, all the time out, and Nurmagomedov having struggled a little bit, especially in the Johnson fight, I just think it's kind of leading to this, to his fall. So I'm taking Barboza I'm going to take him by TKO. I know that's kind of a dangerous pick, but it's just kind of my gut feeling here. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Nurmagomedov ends up winning, but I think I have to go with Barboza in this one. All right, the main event, a women's featherweight title fight. Chris Cyborg versus Holm. And this is another fight I'm going to be betting on, and I just kind of have to go all in on Cyborg. Holm, to me, a very skilled fighter, especially when the matchup favors her, when she's able to get that time and space to work her kicks from range. But on the flip side, I still think she's just not a natural MMA fighter, at least for the elite level of the UFC. Even in the Diakiese fight, Diakiese was able to land shots on her, get inside, and Diakiese is not an elite fighter. She ended up getting an impressive head kick knockout, but even someone like Diakiese is able to find moments of success against her. You know, the Miesha Tate fight, a pretty uneventful fight that she was in control of, but you know, just giving up the takedown late and giving up her back easily, getting choked unconscious. You know, these things just show that she doesn't have the natural well-roundedness of an elite MMA fighter. And as I just said, I think her opponent's style, her success is really dependent on her opponent's style. You know, Rousey, perfect matchup for her. Diakiese, even though she had some success, perfect matchup for her. But the Shevchenko fight, the Tate fight, you're not seeing, you know, anything close to a head kick knockout in those matchups. And it's because these fighters are, you know, more complete MMA fighters, especially Shevchenko, who can manage distance and who can come forward and throw combinations and land, and not just kind of be a sitting duck at range like Diakiese and Rousey were. And Cyborg, you know, with the skill differential in her hands here, I just see her coming forward and, you know, being able to throw fast and land hard and throw big combinations. I just think she's going to kind of smother and overwhelm Holm with volume. And in the tie-ups, I think she's going to be able to take down Holm. We've seen Cyborg go to the ground with, you know, take the fight to the ground against Landsberg, and I believe even her last fight against Evinger, I think she can mix up the striking with her ground game here. And I don't know, I don't mean to just kind of totally write off Holm. She is very dangerous from range and has a very dangerous kicking game, but she doesn't have big power in her hands. She doesn't really have a fluid game between her striking and her wrestling. And Cyborg, you know, all these fighters that I mentioned, like Pennington, you know, Raquel Pennington, and Shevchenko, all these fighters were able to really put a pace and come forward, put hands on Holm. Germaine de Randamie, and they all just, you know, their pace, their offense was too much for Holm to deal with. She had no answer. You know, if she wasn't able to get those reads early in the fight and really make something of her range game, she just had no answer, and her opponents were able to find their way inside and land the more meaningful shots. And someone as dangerous as Cyborg, someone who has as good hands as her, with power and a takedown game, I think she's just going to crush Holm. So I have to go with Cyborg pretty confidently here. I'm going to be placing a big bet on her. So I'm going to go with Cyborg by TKO. To recap my bets, I'm going to go with Cyborg, Calvillo, and Kamaru Usman. Those are going to be my big bets. And then a smaller bet on Rivera, and possibly a bet on Barboza if he's enough of an underdog. You know, that's one where I'd be more looking to take advantage of the odds, more so than just being confident that Barboza is going to win, because I do see that one as a tough matchup to call. But if he's enough of an underdog, I will take a chance on Barboza, and probably by finish, because I don't see him winning a decision. But those are my picks. Thank you guys for watching. Again, follow me on Twitter. My link will be in the description at MMA Breakdown 0. If you haven't checked out my predictions yet for the card taking place prior to this one, UFC on Fox 26, Lawler versus RDA. Check that one out. It will also be linked in the description. And yeah, thank you guys. Take care. I'll have a Merry Christmas, because this card is taking place after Christmas. And I will see you guys for the next one, UFC Fight Night 124. Looks like Stevens versus Choi. All right, guys. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.